Glad to see you here. I hope you noticed how nice the building looks. The looking how clean it is. I know that we had our work day, and I know that people worked real hard, and we like cleaned off the stained glass windows. They look extra bright to me, or even just like we like polished some of the wood. So you can thank everybody who came here and did that. I'm going to do my announcements first, so that everybody can hear them, because I sometimes when we like do it like right after the music, I feel like people just end up not hearing the announcements. So today we have our Women's Fellowship Potluck, so stick around for that. I want to make two kind of big announcements, though. First is that we're going to be starting a midweek women's Bible study, and it's going to be starting on October 10th. I think that there has been flyers floating around, and if you didn't get one, we can get one to you. But next Thursday we're starting, so put it on your calendar. It's going to be at 11 a.m. here at the church, so if you can make that would be excellent. And then the next one we have is next Sunday is our Friend Day, so we just are encouraging everybody to just invite somebody to come to church on that day. We're not going to be doing anything like crazy. But we're just being intentional at wanting to invite our friends or family members or coworkers to come to church, and then we'll obviously have our like fellowship potluck after, or fellowship time with like the goodies and stuff. So just put that on your calendar. Let us pray and get prepared for.
Real quick before prayer, announcement. Just reminding you, Christmas choir starts next Sunday, 1:30 p.m. here. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Let us pray. Right. Okay. So all of us know the desire of wanting to be on the like inside of a group, right? I'm sure we probably all have these memories of this desire, especially when we were younger and in adolescence. And psychologists have noticed this profound need for people to feel a part of a group or a tribe. And this becomes especially prominent in adolescence. And it's a normal part of human growth and development, and specifically that teenagers go through. And this is why adolescence, we start becoming very much concerned around, what our peers think about us, and rather than just what our parents think about us. I think we all can remember that time where we were like, we only cared about, we cared mostly about our families, and that all kind of got switched to our peers. And this is also why many adolescents, maybe you can remember your own journey through this, you go through different stages in groups that you want to be a part of. Maybe at one point you went from being a nerd to a jock to emo or goth, or maybe that I'm probably saying some of the things that you might not relate with, but we try on different kind of hats or identities or groups to be a part of, to kind of find that place that we can fit, and sometimes that can feel like a light switch sometimes. And you're just trying to figure out who you are and where you fit in the world, and you want to have that group that you're a part of. Our brains, there's this thing in our brains that gets switched when we're young, that starts scanning the world for social acceptance in new and profound ways. And I know when I look back in my own life, I saw this, right? I know in middle school and high school, and this was really profound for me. When I was in middle school and high school, I really struggled to fit in. I know that this isn't the case for a lot of people, but I know for me it was really hard. And I always kind of had this feeling of like being an outsider. And to be fair, this is probably true for most teenagers. Most teenagers feel like they're like the only ones going through something, and I'm always feeling like the outsider. So this is like pretty universal. But like when you're going through it, you feel like the only one. And as a guy, I know that I really struggled relating with with a lot of guys. I didn't have a lot of guy friends, and I felt really outside in that world, especially since most of my interests include things that were either artistic or intellectual or kind of nerdy. And so like I didn't care for fixing engines or blowing stuff up or getting laid or getting jacked at the time. So it's like I was like, I didn't feel like I was like, didn't really fit into the stereotypical man things. And then even the things that like I did have, I always felt kind of weird. Like I was like really into crafting. One of the things that I love to do is I love to knit, and now I can spin. But like knitting is typically your average knitter is like a 60-year-old woman, and so it's like I would like go to the knitting store, and there would be like not my crowd as a 15-year-old boy. And then I did try to do the whole like fitting nerdy thing, and like I tried playing Dungeons and Dragons, and then I tried but like I wasn't like, I mean, I did like some video games, but I didn't really like do it in a group, and it like I wasn't so obsessive about it that like I just didn't fit in that crowd. Then I tried the artistic crowd, so I specifically liked music and drama. And I often found that but even there, like in choir, only dude. I think there was like 5 guys in my entire choir, and then even and then in my drama club, I found that I was kind of alienated from some of the other kids because I was too conservative because of my Christian values, and I wasn't talented enough for people to like overlook those things. I was not very great, and so I was like, and so I often was like uninvited to things like cast parties and after shows and stuff like that. And then I was also the weird kid in youth group, right? I came to know Jesus I didn't grow up in the church, so I came to know the Lord in high school. And so then when I was like, I didn't know the lyrics to all the songs that everybody else listened to. I didn't know the music. I didn't know any of these sorts of things. And then I wish Heather was here right now, because then she could relate to me. But like there are like certain like subculture, youth group subculture things that I didn't know. Like if I say, do you know what a sword drill is? Do you know what I'm talking about? Angela? Anybody? Okay, no. Apparently it's an Awana thing where you like find a Bible verse really quickly. I didn't know what a WWJD bracelet was. I didn't know who the Newsboys were. And I didn't also know why everybody was kissing dating goodbye, right? Like, I don't know, like, if you read that book, it was kind of like kissing, Why I Kissed Dating Goodbye by Joshua Harris. It was a big book that people were reading that talked about getting rid of, like, stop dating. Anyway, so like, and then so I was searching for that group. And I think underneath that searching, that like maybe all of us are experiencing, is that we want to experience security and belonging, right? This is a universal human need to feel security and belonging. And sometimes when you do make it into the inner circle, when you make it into the inner group, you do get a feeling. You're like, oh, I found my people. It feels really good. But it's short-lived. C.S. Lewis, in his essay *The Inner Ring*, zeroes in on this tendency of human nature and like this desire and this search and this longing and the ways we try to get into the inner ring of inner circles, of social circles, and how it kind of plays out in the office or the schoolyard or retirement homes. And he uses this essay, and it was addressed to college students, and he's like warning them about this danger, because he points out that this desire to belong is one of the ways that we succumb to participating in evil by striving to be a part of a we. And we kind of like, you're like, okay, you're like, okay, I see your face. You're like, what do you mean by that? How many of us have done something that we know that we shouldn't have because we still wanted to be a part of a group? Right? That's a pretty common universal thing. I remember when I was trying to be cool. So I started swearing a lot in middle school. Right? But this part of the we can be really detrimental. And he even plays this out in one of his novels. It's called That Hideous Strength. And one of the main characters, he knows he's a professor, and he wants to be on the committees and do the thing and to kind of climb the ladder, but he's doing this out of the sense of like wanting to be a part of the group. but he ends up like sacrificing things, and he ends up becoming part of the Nice, which is this evil organization, and it's like kind of destroying this. Anyway, it's a good book, but he kind of plays this out in one of his fiction novels. But we can see this. We can see how we will often compromise our values or our beliefs, and we might even do like some pretty horrible things just to be a part of the we. And secondly, it's problematic because the pleasure of being in the inner ring is temporary. Because if you've ever found that you've like gone into one group, you realize that there is usually a smaller group in the larger group that you might want to be a part of, right? And so what do I mean by this? So say that you're, a young guy and you're like, all I want to be is on the football team. And so then you work really hard, you train, you get onto varsity, but there's like, maybe there's like 20, 50 guys, and then you realize like, oh, there's like a smaller group of guys on the football team that you want to be a part of. They're the cool guys that you want to, and so then you're like, okay, so maybe there's 10 of them, and then you're like, oh, there's like those 3 guys that you want to be, and then like, oh, like you want to be like with the coach, and like you can keep going, right? It's never permanent. So this ultimately, I think this effect, this desire, leaves us feeling trapped. We feel trapped by this desire to fit in. And I love the C.S. Lewis's quote here is that the quest of the inner ring will break your heart unless you can break it. So you need to break the desire or it will break you. The question is, how do we do that? How do we like break out of this quest of feeling like we need to fit in? I think this is a question that many of us are struggling with nowadays. And I think it's at the very heart of a lot of our problems, and why so many of us are trying to find that place where we can belong. And so I think that this is very much a part of like our loneliness, right? Like we feel lonely, we don't feel like we fit in, we don't feel like we have our group, and so we do what we can to get into the group, and then we keep chasing it and chasing it and chasing it and chasing it, and it doesn't ever fill that cup. I think it's one of the reasons why we're so lonely. Now, in his essay, Lewis attempts to answer the question, how to break the quest of the inner ring, and I, found it kind of lacking. He just it was like a little underwhelming. He just says like, just stop trying, and then you'll find yourself in a group. And I was like, and I was meditating on it, and I was like, I don't think that is the most Christian response. And I felt like Christianity and the Bible kind of offer its own solution. Now, if this is your first time here, or you haven't been in a while, first of all, if you're a visitor, thank you for joining us. Please fill out a contact card that you can get out on the one of the tables out in the lobby, and we'd love to stay connected to you. But if you haven't been here in a while, we're right now going in a series on friendship. And when it comes to friendship, I think a part of friendship is finding that group of people, that ring to belong to, that inner ring. But the way Christianity goes about it is a little bit different than the world does. And I think it offers a solution to this problem in surprising ways. So what I mean by this, and I think the biblical wisdom is this: instead of seeking to belong to an inner ring to feel loved, the Christian response is the opposite. Stop striving to feel loved, and instead start simply loving others, and you will find yourself that you are establishing an inner ring of your own. And unlike most, and then this is the other key part, and you start building the church. You start building a new community. And unlike most friendship circles that tend to be closed, right? Like when we can't have an infinite amount of friends, and so our rings tend to get small, and that's not bad. But like the boundary lines have to be established. But one of the things is that oftentimes those get closed. What's unique about Christianity is this: Christian friendship is ever expanding. And it always is seeking to create new additions, and we are called to live on mission to expand the ring, so to speak, if I'm going to kind of borrow Lewis's language. So, and first I want to we have to kind of address the first thing is, instead of stop seeking to be a part of something, we need, and starting to feel loved, because that's often at the heart of it, we want to, the reason why we're in a ring, why we want to be on the inside, why we want to belong, is that we want to feel loved, right? That's the key desire in all of us. All of us want to be loved, and that's not a bad thing. But the Bible calls us to stop focusing so much on ourselves and focus on other people. Like I said earlier, from adolescence, I really struggled to fit in. And this kind of came to a head for me in college. But I had a bit of a turning point. I remember my first year, I made quite a few friends. And I was generally well liked. And for the first time in my life, felt legitimately popular. I had quite a wide social network at my college. And it was kind of weird. But even though I had a wide social network, I didn't feel like I had a close group of friends. And so while I was well liked, and I kind of felt like I found my people a little bit more. By my second year, most of the closer friends that I had made, they had all dropped out, and so I was kind of left alone again. Maybe you can relate with that in an experience at your time. But I felt this connection. I felt this profound disconnection from my college campus. And I remember one night going to the prayer chapel, and I was just I was so bothered by this, and I was just and as I was praying and talking and asking God about what to do, I remember the Lord nudging my heart, saying, "Stop thinking about yourself so much, Austin, and start thinking about what you can do to others." Right? Stop thinking about you so much, and maybe you can start thinking about how can you love other people more? How can you make he kind of flipped the question on me. It's how can you make other people feel as if they belong? And so I left that chapel that night, and I made a choice, rather so much focusing on my own problems and my own needs. I was going to work on being a better friend to other people. And so rather than, and you can't do this with everybody, so I started doing this with a few guys on my dorm section. And lo and behold, something miraculous happened. I started getting closer to people, and my feelings of loneliness started to leave me. When I stopped focusing on myself so much and focusing on other people, I started seeing a change. And when I sit and what does this mean? When we sit and stew on the question, how do I fit in? Who will love me? Who will have my back? That's when our discontentment really comes to the forefront, and where we start feeling isolation and loneliness. But when we start to focus in on other people, that's when we really start to experiencing love. Because love is kind of one of those things that if you give it away, it kind of boomerangs back to you. The companionship comes back to you. When you open your life, rather than saying what can I get from this relationship, but being I'm going to give this to you, you will see profound changes. When we stop seeking to enter an inner ring and simply love those around us well, I think we'll find that we kind of create one naturally and by accident. And we'll find oh, this is where I do belong. And we see this pattern in the Gospels. Jesus didn't seek to serve and to be served, but to serve. And he didn't expect us to come to him first. Rather, he came down and dwelt with us, right? Jesus modeled this himself. Philippians 2:3 says this, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourself. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Have this mind among yourselves. And this is Paul's instruction to the church, to be better, to be united, and to encourage them when they're struggling. When we put on this attitude, we become less self-focused, and when we become other-focused, even if we become other-focused, even at the expense of our own needs and dreams and wants, I think while it seems counterintuitive, we will end up being happier. Because I think culture often tells us the opposite thing. If you want to be happy, you need to chase out your desires and your wants and your ambitions, and you need to put yourself first. Interestingly, psychologists have noted that people who are the most inwardly focused, the people who are most in tune with their desires, most in tune with their wants, most in tune with their needs, who are kind of consistently thinking about themselves, they tend to also be the most anxious. The people who are most connected to their feelings, they tend to also be the people who are the most socially anxious. And psychologists, the people that they found that who are dealing with things like social anxiety, they tend to be like wrapped up in their own thoughts about like, well, what does this person think about me, and what do they do? But the truth is like, if you've ever felt socially anxious before, the secret is nobody's thinking about you. That's the truth, which might suck, right? That we might think like, oh, like that, what, ooh. We have to just stop thinking about ourselves so much and realize, like, I know, like I had a lot of gym anxiety. I know that I've like shared this a lot, but like I started going to the gym, and at first I was like, oh, I'm going to feel so uncomfortable. And I realized like nobody in the gym cares about me working out whatsoever. But you know what people do want? People do want to be loved. So when we start practicing not thinking about ourselves, but what other people are thinking, if you go to a party and you are genuinely interested in another person and what they think and what they feel, you know what will happen? They'll be like, wow, they really liked me. And then we start building a relationship, right? We need to stop thinking about ourselves. And this attitude shift is really important if we really want to practice Christian friendship, because that's like what we're talking about this series is Christian friendship. When we want to do it well, when we want to do fellowship well, we have to stop thinking about ourselves. And I think that's here. And I have found that the people who are most miserable and dissatisfied with their churches and their world are the ones who constantly are thinking about, what can church do for me? Right? People who are most dissatisfied with church tend to be the people who think church is most about them. Do I like the music? Does it have the small groups I like? Do I like the preaching? Is it hitting to where I need to hit? And rather than being so self-focused, we should try to change things. How can I serve? How can I make somebody else feel included? How can I get this person connected? How can I keep up with this person? You know? Rather than being like, oh, I got sick and nobody checked in on me. Being like, I'm going to check in on people. This leads me to my next point. It's this, that the church isn't simply an inner ring for those who believe. The church doesn't exist as a social club for people who are already in the know. This is important. Rather, we are on mission to let other people know about Jesus so that they can become disciples of Jesus as well. And then as a result, we expand. We expand who's in the family. We expand our network, and we ultimately expand the ring of fellowship. Matthew 28:19. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I command you. This is probably one of the most challenging things about Christianity, is that there's a tension between wanting to love those in the church well by devoting time and resources and energy as a family, but also with the recognition that through God's grace, that there are more sons and daughters to be adopted into the family of God. And so there's a struggle often between those of us wanting to focus on either side of the pendulum, right? Other side of the tension. How do we care for the people that we have well, and then how do we reach out to others? And I think there's often the struggle as we think love in the terms of a zero-sum game. Like there's like only so much affection and care that I have for somebody, right? There's only so much capacity that I have. But the truth is, love is one of those things that's ever expanding. You can always love more. I am blessed to have 3 children, and each time Heather and I found out that she was expecting, there was always this part of me that wondered, is there any way I can love this next little person? Can I, I already love the one that I have. Is there any more space? Can I? And I have found that my capacity to love my children has grown with the more children that I have. And I think this is true with the church. As we invite people in, it grows our capacity to love. And the more and more, kind of the inner ring kind of expands, so to speak. This is the thing that I love truly about the church, is that I think it's the only collection of people on earth that can be radically inclusive. That there is, I think, a genuine place for everybody in the church. And so it's like maybe you're feeling like you're here and you're like wondering, like, is there a place for me? Because there's like all sorts of different kinds of people in the world. Is there space for me in this ring? And I definitely believe so. Like, this is why I think Jesus said, in my Father's house there are many rooms. And so I want to say that you're like if you're wondering, like, is this for me? Yes, it's for you. But it requires us first that we intentionally need to make an effort to make friends with people who are not like us and go outside our comfort zone. I don't really like that. This is one of the radical aspects of the Great Commission, is that it went out to the whole world, to all kinds of different people, not just the Jews. And this was the expectation at Jesus' time because at first Jesus only came and did most of his ministry among Jewish people. And there's a few times where he talks to Gentiles, but he's just like, I'm here first for the house of Israel. And that was expected. Jews of Jesus' day thought, the Messiah is going to come and it's just for the Jews. But Jesus kind of starts to expand the picture, and we see that the kingdom isn't just for the Jews, it's for everybody. And Jesus wants the nations to come into the kingdom. And the nations it's a technical term in the Greek. It means ethnos, or a people group. But I think that you can kind of, and with people groups you have, various cultures, backgrounds, and histories. But I don't think that just has to happen on a ethnicity level. I think that this diversity can happen on a much bigger level as well. The church needs, like, if our churches look all like one kind of person, we're doing it wrong. Now, we might not have the opportunity to go to different nations, right? And I don't think that Jesus is expecting all of us to go because at that time, in Jesus' context, you had a lot more cultural, what's the word? There was a lot of different kinds of people. I know when I lived in Florida, the amount of different people groups there, like when I lived in Orlando, was like much higher. There was just like lots of different kinds of ethnicity, lots of people coming from different cultures. Like I worked, like my coworkers, when I lived there, I had like Haitian coworkers and Brazilian coworkers and Puerto Rican coworkers and African American coworkers, and like it was like and so there's definitely like ethnic diversity is one kind of diversity, but there's also different kinds of diversities. That might be age, right, and generational diversity. I am surprised at how often in our world, we don't tend to have friendships that cross age boundaries, right? That most of our friends typically tend to look like our and I'm guilty of this myself. Most of my closest, like all of my closest friends are all like, well, I take that back. Most of my close friends are in their 30s, and then above that's like 40s, basically the same age group, right? I don't have I wouldn't say I have any super close friends with people who are much older than mine. Right? Like this is true. Maybe, but this might also include like class. Class is a thing, like, right? We can have class distinction. We can have educational differences. I mean, a lot of people, they've done studies that if you have only a GED, you're most likely not to have friends who have like higher education. Like you're less likely to have friends who have like PhDs. Or maybe even like, and this is probably the harder one, religious identity. We as a culture have become more and more polarized, like because of things like the internet and social media. They call this the great sort, that the big sort, that we tend to fall into the groups that think exactly like the way we think. So that whether that be like you're a Democrat or Republican, or and what's crazy is all of the sorting is happening naturally, but then it's reinforced by our social media. So it's like if you're like on TikTok, and I saw this recently and it was crazy. If you're on TikTok and you watch the same video as somebody else, the comments that come up, they know you're out, like they know you're like they pick up on the things that you care about or whatever. And so if you identify as liberal and they kind of pick that up, they'll show you the comments that feed into your worldview, which is crazy. And then likewise, if you're like on the other side of the spectrum, it will show you the comments. And so then what ends up happening is then you're like, oh yeah, like everybody agrees with me, and then I feel more right. But we are called to reach out despite differences, to tell people about Jesus, tell people about our faith. and that might mean that there are going to be Christians who are going to disagree with you politically, who are going to have different histories, who are going to value different things, and that's okay. They're going to see things differently. And the other thing is this also requires us to be hospitable for anybody who shows up, intentionally making space for new people. I remember when I was a youth group leader, I'd often do this at youth group or summer camps, that when I would walk into a room and I noticed and I clocked somebody who was new for the first time, or who weren't fitting in, I tried to work really hard to bring them into the fold. Help them participate in the games. Let them know what to expect, what we're like, because I know if you've ever been to a church for the first time, it can be really weird, and I think it's so brave for people to go and attend a church for the first time. But then I'm like, what's going to happen? And if you've had any experiences going to church, you know that different churches do things very differently, and it's always like, what's going to happen next? Is there something good and crazy happening right around the corner? So I'd like to let them know what was going to happen. I'd also try to find people. I would try to learn things about the student and help them be like, okay, this person likes this thing. Maybe this other person likes this thing. I'm going to connect them. And if they didn't have anybody to sit if they didn't know anybody and they didn't have anybody to sit next to them, I would sit next to them, because it can feel really isolating not to come to a church service alone and then not be seen. And we can do the same thing. If we see people who are visiting for the first time, who looks new, introduce yourself. Ask questions about them. Ask them why they're visiting. See if they would enjoy sitting next to you. Because, right, there's even I know that I've heard stories about this. I've never been to a church like this, but I've heard stories where it's people come and sit and they're like, oh, you're sitting in my pew, and you're like, oh. I've never experienced that. Maybe that has to do with the churches that I've attended during my life, but yeah, rather than just being like, this pew isn't for you, just do you want to come sit with me? Visiting a church can be scary, and you never know what to expect. And having somebody to walk alongside you can be comforting, and to feel seen. And I think this really just shows that, hey, when you're hospitable, it shows the group's ready to have people come in. Because if you're just satisfied with where you're at, then you're just not gonna invite anybody into your group, right? If you have your group of friends that all click together, you're really not gonna want to break that open. And I get this. I am a person naturally who I enjoy the company of 3 or 4 people, and I'm just satisfied with that. I am not a networker. I know people who love just meeting lots of new people and getting them involved. I'm not one of those people, but we can all practice hospitality. And we need to realize that the inner ring of the church is not full. There's space at the table, and we need to help people imagine that they can be a part of this group. And that's kind of the heart and inspiration behind Friend Day. I know that we talked about this earlier, but it's to expand the inner ring, to help people get to know Jesus or to recommit to Jesus and to make disciples. But this will not happen. People will not come into the inner ring unless they are invited, right? You don't if you're not invited to the party, you don't go to the party. But Jesus' heart is that everybody gets invited to the party. This is what his parable of the banquet was, right? The Jews were we're totally happy with Jesus, they weren't happy with Jesus. They didn't actually want to come to the party. So Jesus threw open the invitation. Jesus wasn't like, I'm only going to give invitations to these people, and if they don't accept it, I'm not going to have a party. Jesus is like, well, then let's just invite people from whenever. And so, people did. If someone doesn't take the first bold step to talk to somebody who's different, and if they're not made to feel welcome, I don't think we're going to be doing a very good job. And I think this is also true. We tend to more often, we tend to belong before we believe. I think this is a key point. Like if we tend to belong to a church first before we tend to believe all the other things. And that's not a bad thing, right? That that there's an experiential piece to belief, that you're like, oh, like this like is real, like this, the love of God is here, the Holy Spirit is working here, and we kind of experience it through people. I think that this takes knowing Christians and being friends with them first before they start believing in anything that we have to believe. And it helps us imagine ourselves being a follower of Jesus as well. So so when we think about next week, I'm encouraging you, try to make this happen. And inviting people to the church and making them feel hospitable isn't just a pastor's job; it's all of our jobs. And this is what I think is the note. Like this is a vocation for all of us. So keep praying about who you might want to invite to church next week, and how you can be a part of this, expanding the ring. All of us want to belong somewhere, right? I think all of us are searching to belong somewhere. I think that this is a core part of the human heart. And what's core about this is I think that God put it in our heart because we belong with God. That's where we ultimately belong. That's where we ultimately belong. And I think that that's what we're searching for when we're searching it for in like those like circles, those inner ring circles of intimacy and being known. And those just are a shadow of what God has for us. When you experience like a really close friendship, or if you experience the beauty of that thing, that I think that points us closer to the reality of the kingdom of God and what God has for us. But just our little or social rings are not that. And this desire to find this inner ring can lead us to do things that we might regret later, or having a crushing sense of being left out. But rather than chasing that feeling, Jesus gives us an example that we should stop so much thinking about ourselves and thinking of others, to be hospitable and making space for unlikely friends, and in doing so, helping us escape the endless pursuit of friendship and finding fulfillment in the real connections through Christ. Let us pray.